Greetings, my dear viewer. You're on the channel The Price of Cheating. The channel is for those who appreciate traditional family values and condemn adultery. So be sure to subscribe to the channel. Let's get started. The frost of that Friday afternoon clung to my skin, colder than any I could recall, marking the instant I saw them. It was a vision so unreal, so jarring, that it felt pulled from the depths of some twisted nightmare. There, standing in the doorway of the home I'd shared with my wife for over 20 years, was Sophia, the woman who once swore eternal devotion to me, accompanied by a man who was unmistakably not me. "Ben, what are you doing here?" Her voice sliced through the silence, high-pitched and laden with disbelief. Her eyes widened as they met mine, seated at the kitchen table. It was clear she hadn't expected me to be home, not on a day when I should have been miles away at work. The man trailing behind her exuded a polished elegance, his tailored suit radiating wealth and self-assurance. He stood as though an extension of her, their synchronized movements unsettlingly perfect. Together they carried an air of rehearsed intimacy that turned my stomach. Sophia's beauty hadn't diminished, but it was as though she had shed the very essence of the woman I once knew. Her familiar features, the auburn waves I'd adored, were now untamed, a stark contrast to her once precise demeanor. Her guarded eyes, once brimming with the warmth of shared memories, now stared coldly. Even her attire, a crisp blouse unbuttoned just enough to catch attention, felt deliberately provocative, a calculated shift I couldn't ignore. "Who's this?" I finally asked, keeping my voice as steady as possible despite the tempest raging inside. I fought to maintain control, to keep the trembling rage from seeping into my tone. The man hesitated, casting a questioning glance at Sophia. When she stepped aside, he offered his hand in an awkward gesture. "Mr. Taylor, I'm Ashton Wright," he said with smooth confidence, his words polished but devoid of warmth. "Sophia and I have been working on a project at the firm." I ignored the offered handshake, choosing instead to study him. My hand tightened around the glass of water I held, the urge to fling it across the room almost overpowering. "I know who you are," I said after a pause, rising from my seat with an unsettling calm. "You're the man who's been spending time with my wife." Sophia's composure faltered. Her face twitched, betraying a crack in her facade. Ashton shifted uncomfortably, casting glances toward the door as though gauging an escape route. He froze, uncertain of his next move. I turned my attention to him, seizing the moment. "So you're the one helping Sophia with her projects, huh?" I spat, my sarcasm cutting and unfiltered. My anger now coursed freely, impossible to restrain. "Ben, stop!" Sophia interjected, her voice sharp and urgent. "We're not here to argue, we need to talk." "Talk?" I shot back, incredulous. "About what? About how you brought this man into my home? Or about the lies you've been weaving for God knows how long?" Her lips tightened, her attempted response faltering as guilt seeped through her expression. But when I finally voiced the question that had gnawed at me for months, her mask shattered completely. "Why wasn't I enough for you anymore?" I demanded, my voice breaking with the weight of the question. Her gaze dropped to the floor, unable to meet mine, and in that moment, clarity struck with brutal force. Her betrayal ran far deeper than the physical. She had abandoned our marriage long before this encounter. I was no longer her partner, merely a relic of a life she had already left behind. A surge of rage swept over me, and for once I didn't stifle it. "I want a divorce, Ben," Sophia said, her voice trembling as the words landed with devastating finality. The force of her statement felt like a blow to the chest, stealing the air from my lungs. "You've got to be kidding me," I replied, my mind reeling. "After everything we've been through, you're going to throw it all away for this?" I gestured toward Ashton, who now seemed desperate to fade into the background. His discomfort was palpable, but Sophia silenced him with a subtle gesture. "Ben," she said, meeting my eyes at last, "we've been through a lot, but this isn't something we can fix. It's different now." Her words pierced through me, leaving me hollow. I wanted to shout, to break something, anything to release the anguish suffocating me. But instead, I stood frozen, the weight of her decision crushing me. "You're right," I said finally, my voice low and steady. "This can't be fixed. You made your choice." For a moment she hesitated, as though reconsidering. But the moment passed, and she turned to Ashton, sealing her betrayal. "We're leaving for the weekend," she announced, her tone resolute. "We need time, together, in the city." And just like that, the life I had built, the love I thought would endure, crumbled into an unrecognizable void. There was no return from this. I needed clarity. "What are you saying?" I managed to ask, my voice trembling as the words escaped. Sophia, her gaze glued to the floor, took a deep breath. Her fingers nervously twisted the wedding ring on her hand, the once sacred symbol now seeming more like a weight. "Ben, please try to understand," she began, her voice shaky yet firm. "This isn't about chasing some reckless thrill or running away from everything." Her hesitation was palpable, the air between us heavy with unspoken truths. She exhaled deeply before continuing, her resolve evident despite the quaver in her tone. "It's about more than that. Ashton and we're going to the city for the weekend because I feel like I'm suffocating here. I need room to breathe, to think, to rediscover who I am outside of this life we've built together." Each word hit me like a blow, her candor slicing through the thin veneer of normalcy we'd maintained. "Our life, Ben, it's become a routine, an endless loop that leaves no space for anything else. I've been drowning in it," she admitted, her voice breaking but gaining strength as she spoke. "We've lost something, and I can't ignore that anymore." Her words grew bolder as she continued, her emotions no longer held in check. "We talk, but we don't connect. We live together, but we're not truly living. Everything feels like it's on autopilot, and I can't keep pretending. I need this time away to figure out if this life is still what I want, if it's what's best for me." Sophia's eyes finally met mine, glistening with a mixture of fear and newfound resolve. "I don't know if this will change anything," she admitted. "I don't even know if I'll come back, but I have to figure this out before it's too late." Her honesty was both brutal and undeniable. She continued, her voice softer now but still resolute. "I'm not sure when I'll return, or if I will at all. This isn't about you being inadequate or unloving, Ben. It's about me needing to confront myself, to face my choices and decide if this is the life I can keep living. If I don't do this, I'll grow resentful, and that resentment will destroy us both." Her shoulders sagged as though unburdening herself of the truth had sapped her strength. "I'm sorry, Ben. This isn't easy for me either, but I need to do this for myself." Sophia stepped toward the door, her decision final. As she moved, Ashton lingered behind, his expression a mix of discomfort and arrogance. The sight of him fueled a storm of emotions within me, anger, pain, and the bitter taste of betrayal. Yet I stayed rooted to the spot, frozen as they left. The door closed behind them with a quiet, devastating click. In the deafening silence that followed, I sank into a chair, my mind racing. This wasn't just the end of a marriage, it felt like the unraveling of everything I'd believed in. The foundation of my world had crumbled, leaving me adrift in a sea of uncertainty. For a moment grief consumed me, but then something else emerged. Resolve. If Sophia and Ashton thought this was the end of the story, they were wrong. I took a deep, steadying breath and allowed my mind to shift into a mode of cold calculation. Divorce was inevitable, but so was justice. Ashton wouldn't escape this unscathed. I wasn't about to let them destroy my life without consequences. The house was eerily quiet, but my thoughts churned like a storm. Their betrayal echoed in every corner, fueling my determination. Rising from my seat, I immediately knew the first step. Evidence. Sophia's laptop, left carelessly on the dining table, became my weapon. Within an hour, I had unearthed everything: damning emails, text messages, receipts for a necklace I'd never seen but had noticed on her in photos with Ashton. Each revelation was a dagger to the heart, but I channeled the pain into action. By the time I finished, I had gathered an arsenal of proof. To ensure no detail escaped scrutiny, I hired a private investigator to follow their every move. I knew exactly where they would be: a luxury hotel downtown, a place we had once visited during happier times. The bitter irony of it stung, but it also spurred me forward. Monday couldn't come soon enough. As the new week dawned, I was ready. My first stop was my lawyer's office, where I laid everything bare. He listened intently, his expression grim but focused. "We'll move quickly," he assured me. "She'll be served today." This was no longer about heartbreak. It was about strategy. I was no longer just a shattered husband. I was his client. But there was one more confrontation I needed to face. Ashton. He needed to feel the fire he'd ignited. Armed with the address of his office, I arrived unannounced. The receptionist's startled expression betrayed her unease, but she directed me to his door nonetheless. The moment of reckoning had arrived, and I was prepared for whatever came next. Ashton's head jerked up from his desk, surprise flickering across his face as I quietly closed the door behind me. The words he had prepared to greet me with faltered, never spoken, as I raised a hand to cut him off. "You've made a grave error," I began, my voice slicing through the stillness like a scalpel. "I'm here to ensure you comprehend the full weight of your actions." The confident facade he wore started to crumble, his gaze darting nervously, a mixture of confusion and unease beginning to take hold. "Ben, we can resolve this," he stammered, half rising from his chair in an uncertain gesture. "There's nothing left to resolve," I interjected coldly. "You'll submit your resignation today. I've already delivered indisputable evidence of your misconduct to the higher-ups. After this, you'll need to find a new profession, a new city, a new existence." My words were unyielding, final, carrying the certainty of a judge pronouncing sentence. Ashton sank back into his chair, his composure unraveling entirely. The fight left him in an instant, extinguished by the stark inevitability of his downfall. He realized there was no way out. My evidence had destroyed any chance he had of salvaging his career here. If he had any sense, he'd disappear and start fresh, far away from this place. With Ashton's fate settled, my attention shifted to Sophia. The divorce papers would arrive at her office, delivered publicly among her colleagues. It was a calculated move, harsh but no harsher than the web of betrayal she had woven over the past months. The fallout was swift and unforgiving. She left message after message on my voicemail, her voice filled with desperation, but I refused to acknowledge her pleas. Her once comforting voice had turned into a bitter echo of her deceit. I ignored her calls, deleted her texts without reading them. The woman I had once adored was gone, replaced by someone I no longer recognized. As the days stretched into weeks, the divorce unfolded with the force of a storm, growing in momentum until there was no stopping it. The evidence I presented in court was airtight, leaving her little room to maneuver. The prenuptial agreement, which had seemed like a trivial safeguard back then, now sealed her fate. She walked away with almost nothing, a consequence of her own choices. But I wasn't done yet. My final act of retribution involved a relic of our shared past. Art had been one of the cornerstones of our relationship. We had spent years curating a collection together, treasures from our travels. One piece in particular, a replica of a Caravaggio painting she cherished, became the centerpiece of my final move. When she came to collect her belongings, I made sure the painting was prominently displayed, her eyes locked onto it as she packed. "You're keeping the Caravaggio?" she asked softly, a faint hope lacing her tone. "It's just a painting," I replied, my voice flat and devoid of emotion. "You've lost far more than that." Tears welled in her eyes, but I remained unmoved. The person before me was a shadow of someone I once loved, a fragment of pain and betrayal. "I hope one day you can forgive me," she said, her voice breaking as she stood on the threshold. I turned away, my expression unreadable. "That day will never come," I answered, dismissing her with a finality she couldn't contest. She left, and with her departure, the chapter of our marriage closed for good. What was once a relationship others envied now lay in ruins. I was free, but that freedom came tinged with bitterness. Alone in the silence of the house, I reflected on my decisions. Had I gone too far? Perhaps. But in the wake of betrayal, I had been faced with a choice: remain a victim or take control and rise above it. I had chosen to take control, no matter the cost. As the sun dipped below the horizon and shadows stretched long across the room, I sat with only the quiet as my companion. The echoes of the past were finally still, yet the victory felt hollow. Revenge had claimed a high price, and as night descended, I was left to wonder whether it had been worth it. This concludes the story. If you like it, then put your powerful like and subscribe to the channel.